Welcome to That Pennsylvania Witch podcast. My name is Katelyn Dawn. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for tuning into That Pennsylvania Witch podcast. On today's episode, I have the privilege of speaking with Nicholas Pearson for a second time this year. I am really excited to share all of the details about his upcoming book and other projects with you. Hi, Nicholas. Thank you so much for coming on again.
Twice in 1 year and you're not sick of me. I'm really thankful. So I'm glad to be here.
I'm psyched to have you on again. I just finished The Witching Stones, which is your new book that's coming out. When is the release date?
Officially, it's out October 6th.
So it's a powerful title. Can you share inspiration behind the title?
Yeah, so I have to give credit where credit is due. Some years ago, probably around 2020, 2021, the great in-between times, if you will, I was working on a very unrelated project, Flower Essences from the Witch's Garden, and I was just eating up every book I could find on not just flower essences themselves, but ethnobotany and magical herbalism. And I really fell in love with a book by Harold Roth called The Witching Herbs. And I felt in his writing a kind of kindred spirit, the way he brings in the horticulture and the botanical side of our plants, so we have a better appreciation for them from a spiritual and energetic and magical experience, because understanding the life cycle of a plant and which parts you use and which compounds are in which bits tells you something about its spiritual virtues. And that reminded me of the way that I work geologically. And I kind of put that away on a back shelf of my mind until I was working on an unrelated project, a short essay for inclusion in a book published by Weiser called Scott Cunningham, The Path Taken, by Christine Cunningham Ashworth, his sister. Scott is a legend in our field. He's kind of the origin of the A to Z directory of these kinds of things, whether it's plants or oils or crystals, gems, and metal magic is one of his encyclopedias. So I wrote a little piece about his influence in the crystal world, which remains ongoing, and working with Judy Gillis at Weiser. She's the editor at large there on this project, and having this kind of idea ruminating in the back of my mind. I was working on a class about flint and I couldn't fit it all in. I thought, Judica, is there any chance you might be interested in a title kind of like Harold Roth's The Witching Herbs, but with rocks? It would necessarily be different. We have different practices. We're talking about different substances, different tools, different, allies and spirits. But it would be kind of similar. I'd want that 13 chapter structure and other things to kind of evoke a familiarity there. And she said, how soon can you send me a proposal? So here we are. I finally wrote the book.
Well, it's amazing. I was instantly hooked, and I was surprised to see flint. But then when I really thought about it, it made sense. But the whole thing, everything that you chose to include and the depth that you went into with each of them was very impressive. I love it. And if you recall the last time you were on, we nerded out a little bit about jet and amber. You said, well, I can't reveal too much. And now I know why. There's a whole chapter dedicated to those. I guess they're both trees, aren't they? It's kind of like a resin or a petrified wood of sort.
Yeah, so these are both fossils. And they're both organic in composition. So they haven't undergone a process called permineralization. Like with petrified wood, we have usually chalcedony, agate. It's cryptocrystalline quartz come in, and it takes over the structure of the wood. It kind of crowds out and replaces all of the organic material, but retains the appearance of it. In amber, however, it is just the resin itself, like tree sap, that has been hardened and annealed by the passage of time. And with jet, we have the wood that has been preserved. There's a couple theories about how they usually involve watery environments, but that wood is getting flattened and saturated with a little bit of mineral content, but it is still organic in nature. It hasn't been replaced. So historically, they were regarded as the same substance, just in two different color variants, which is why we get some colorful folk names for jet, like witch's amber and black amber. They're historically, they've both found in coastal communities. They are both buoyant in salt water. They're both combustible. They take on similar polishes. They're both lightweight. They're easily worked. They've been in use since the Stone Age. So because of those similarities, they really needed to be a chapter together. Plus, it gave me an excuse to kind of go down the rabbit hole with the origin of the stones of the high priestess, or like the witch's beads, witch's necklace. They go by a lot of different names. And I was interested in finding some historical precedents for it and kind of fleshing out that combination in the modern witchcraft movement. And of course, the research was exciting and did not disappoint.
Yes, the information in there is wonderful. Was really impressed with how your book was set up, and it is a little bit different than some of the other ones that you've written. Can you give our listeners a snapshot of what they can expect from the Witching Stones as far as is it a guide or something more than that? Because I really thought it was a unique setup. I enjoyed the format very much.
Thank you. That format is really the crux of it. There are three main sections to every one of the 13 chapters. We have the stone, the lore, and the craft. There'll be, a little intro material here and there, where I kind of wax poetic about what a stone means to me or how it might have been perceived culturally in eras gone by. And when we kind of jump into that first section, the stone, we're talking about maybe its historical uses, just kind of at a glance, its influence on human history, and sometimes more than human history. We are looking at its geology, its formation process, its occurrence in nature. What are any relevant physical or optical or other properties that might give us an idea of this? So, in the case of lodestone, we're talking about its magnetism. In the case of flint, we're also talking about its ability to create this, it's called conchoidal fracture. So here's a little flake that came off of a flint nodule that has these kind of sharp edges. It's been dulled because I pulled it out of a river, but that sharp edge is what's made it useful over time. We'll also kind of set the stage with that in many cases to reference it in later sections. My hope was that the amount of geology was relevant to the experience of working with the stones. So I have to do like a certain requisite amount of speaking that weird language geologies in the book. I have to use the jargon. And to sleep at night, I have to tell you what is a silicate or what is this and do that. But ultimately, I don't really dwell on stuff if it's not going to help us in the future. So in the case of flint, it's really enlightening to see the kind of environment in which it forms and how we've gotten a better understanding of how flint forms, because it literally occurs in what was the meeting space between the aerobic and anaerobic zones of this kind of primordial sludge at the bottom of the shallow tropical seas long before we were around. In that meeting space between the two in the liminal zone is this stone that folklorically has been associated with liminal spaces and other worlds and protection from whatever might be going on there. So the stone section is our geology, but it really funnels us into understanding section 2, which is the lore. Here's where we talk about maybe how the material evidence of a stone's use can be interpreted. In the case of flint, it's not just the fact that people made projectiles, but the fact that those projectiles were recycled by later generations, sometimes thousands and tens of thousands of years after they were made, and took on their own kind of symbolic meaning, their own ritual use. We are looking at maybe the curative properties of stones. We're looking at their association with different figures in myth and history. We're taking a look at what the texts called lapidaries, which is like an herbiary or a bestiary, which are about plants and animals respectively. So lapidaries are kind of something we think of as a medieval text, but in truth, the oldest book to survive in any fragment is a lapidary from Mesopotamia. So it's quite a very ancient tradition to write books about rocks. I certainly did not invent the category. People have been doing it long before me. And The goal for this second section is to give us inspiration for practice. If we understand what something is and how it formed, why people have used it and what they've used it for, then that leads us into the third little trifecta of every chapter, which is the craft. And this is where we get hands-on. So there's an overview of what we as modern practitioners can do with stones. What like practical applications are there for moonstone or jet or salt or whichever stone that we're looking at? And then the chapter closes with a collection of spells or rituals or other practices. Some of them are very very kind of dressed down in the garb of folk magic. We don't need to cast a circle and call the quarters. Of course you can, but I'm not here to tell you what your practice needs to look like. I'm here to just report on the stone magic part of it. Others are a little bit more complex, so you get some that are quite creative and some that are very simple. And then there are also recipes. There's some oils and incenses and other objects in the book that you can make that are meant to be kind of ingredients in our spellcraft.
Yes, I mean, I rather enjoyed all of it, especially the format, like I mentioned previously, but I was blown away by your perspective and how helpful it was. I mean, thinking about Flint, you see Flint in every museum, at every burial site. I have ancestors in museums, I mean, I just do, that are buried with Flint, and you don't think about the depth of that. Oftentimes you just kind of look at, okay, they're buried with pots and weapons, and in some cases animals, offerings, food, jewelry, and you don't think about why, the symbolism, why they were buried that way. And you even mentioned that there were archaeological sites where the bodies were resting on top of or sandwiched between flint. That was fascinating because I wasn't even aware of that. So once again, the depth that you went into with this and your research is just lovely. Very, very lovely.
Thank you. Yeah, flint is such a magical stone. Talking about the evidence that we've got in burials is really striking. A lot of the flints that are used in settings like that aren't just the common pebbles we find on beaches or stream beds. Even though flint was accessible in those places, some of the most culturally significant deposits of flint that were worked in the Stone Age were mines, actual mines, dug, I mean, meters and meters and meters uh, deep into the earth, and then with branching tunnels that follow the seams of flint at distinct strata. And people had to descend into the underworld to extract this flint, sandwiched, between large layers of chalk, and then they would bury their ancestors between strata of flint as if they were descending to the underworld, granting them safe passage to whatever their concept of this other world might look like. And as modern practitioners, one, that's beautiful, it's poetic, it's meaningful, it shows us that symbolic thinking and therefore symbolic acting, in other words, ritual, has been around for a very, very long time. Nothing is new under the sun. But it also reminds us that stone magic can be very elegant and very kind of primal at the same time. We don't need 1,001 different kinds of rocks and minerals and gems and fossils. They're great. I love them. I'm sure I have more than that number, but we can work profound magic with very humble stones like flint.
Oh, I agree. I agree. I have a mentor that often says that stones are the timekeepers and that they don't need to be fancy. I agree with you there. Were there any specific stones or rituals that you featured or kind of came up in the process of writing this book that surprised you? Any new personal revelations?
There were a lot of things kind of all throughout. Um, as far as like the history and folklore goes, probably the most surprising thing was in the kind of modern witchy scene. If you ask 100 witches to name the witchiest crystal, I'm sure a majority are probably going to say moonstone. This is definitely not an official data set, but just the evidence of what I see in the field, I think we just kind of collectively, instinctively go, oh, it's named after the moon. It's got moon goddess vibes. That's witchy. Um, we do have references to things called moonstones, not by that modern name, but things called moonstones that date back to at least the kind of Greco-Roman era. But we don't know what those stones were. And I had a lot of difficulty finding any evidence whatsoever of pre-Renaissance era use of moonstones, at least in terms of European magical and spiritual traditions. I may have found a couple of medieval treasure bindings. So these would be like fancy cases with precious metals and gems set in them that you would house usually scriptures, but they might be other important texts. And they were, kind of like reliquaries, but not for dead people's remains, but for dead people's words, in the case of scriptures. I may have found a couple of those that have some moonstones set in them. It's very hard to tell. Um, and that surprised me quite a lot because when you look at modern books on crystals, people attribute a lot of pre-modern uses to moonstones, but I can't find significant evidence of that. That was really surprising. And so I think we've filled in the gaps between whatever the ancients called moonstone, which isn't our moonstone. It might have been dozens of different things. And then our profound love of moonstone that we've kind of cultivated in the modern era, which is strongly influenced by the Art Deco movement, by the arts and crafts movement, the kind of aesthetics of those two, which don't really resemble one another, but they both really loved moonstone in their kind of jewelry and decorative stonework. Those aesthetics certainly influence things like fantasy and the modern witchcraft revival. So we kind of got this love for moonstone in a really backwards kind of way, and that fascinated me. But there were definitely some other twists and turns throughout the book. There were some creative practices in there that I won't say I invented wholesale because this is built on a longstanding tradition, but trying to find inspiration for um, crafts and for rituals that weren't simply charge a crystal and put it in your pocket. We've seen plenty of that. That is a valuable practice.
Sure.
I'm not going to do 4 versions of that for all 13 chapters. I really wanted some different stuff. So, there's a creativity spell in the Flint chapter where you take flint and a striker or some pyrite if you've got a lot of elbow grease and you actually set your intention on fire. There's a healing spell in the salt chapter where you make a kind of poppet out of salt. And testing that to make sure that it could in fact be done was super fun. That was a really enjoyable practice. I also knew that there were going to be these kind of bookends in the first chapter on Flint and the last chapter on Emerald that involved, shall we say, themes of illumination that are echoed repeatedly in the historical record and the kind of folkloric record for both of those stones. But it was just such a joy to write this book. I fell in love with every one of the stones over and over again as I was researching and compiling and analyzing and ultimately writing.
That was very apparent. You write with such reverence for the stones. There really is a sense of love and wonder kind of woven throughout the text. What is your personal spiritual philosophy when it comes to the mineral kingdom?
I tried to summarize some main points in both the introduction and the conclusion to this book. First and foremost, every rock is magic, period. Not just that it is magical, but it is magic embodied. To hold part and parcel of the body of Mother Earth is to touch the gods, to touch the sacred, to touch time, to touch the things outside of time. And that shifts our perspective so much. It grants us access to a very long tradition of stone magic, of stone healing, of stone mysticism. Another like really core tenet of my own philosophy when it comes to stones is that they are inspirited like us. I often describe myself as a kind of feral animist. I don't really attribute a lot of rules to my animism. I just kind of acknowledge that it's there. And some of those spirits and intelligences or confluences are maybe more intimate teachers, and others are kind of like strangers that have just passed by in the night. We don't have to get to know each other. It's fine. If I had to listen in on every conversation, every lesson, every secret of every spirit around me at all times, I'd go crazy, as I think any of us would. It'd just be too much background noise. So, although I find myself wanting to explore this kind of animate expanse of the mineral kingdom, I'm also on a need to know basis, and I don't need to know everything all at the same time. So the other kind of, I'd say, core tenet, core principle philosophy is that geology itself is magical if we know how to look for it. And that if we explore the geology of any given rock or mineral or fossil or gemstone or metallic ore or anything else, we will find inspiration for our magic. And we do ourselves a disservice to ignore that. And I know that we're both STEM people, so we both appreciate that. But definitely taking time to find the magic in what is otherwise really mundane is very powerful. And if you can do that with a boring, in air quotes, rock like flint or salt, then you can absolutely do that with our rare and exotic gems, our emeralds, our moonstones, our labradorites. Finding magic in the earth, maybe I should say recognizing the magic in the earth, is what this is all about. And I think geology is one of the ways of doing that.
Oh, I agree. And I think it's so interesting once you get really into it, kind of sensing the energy of stones and that sort of thing. I used to have to ask one of my favorite stone mentors is a purveyor of stones at a local market, and I would like to give them a shout out, but I don't have permission. So if I end up getting permission afterwards, I will definitely add his shop to the list. But I used to bring my stones to him. Is this real? Is this actual citrine? Because often citrine is artificially heat treated quartzite because that's what citrine is. It's quartzite that's been exposed to radiation, and you can really tell the difference after a while after you work with these stones. But they're willing allies, and I feel like they are a connection to the overall matrix. Like if you look at Earth as a matrix and the fact that our existence and the existence of these stones is pretty darn unlikely, looking at that perspective is interesting to me too. I like it. For listeners who may be new to crystal magic, what's the best way to begin working with witching stones or any stones in a meaningful way?
Explore them. And I mean that in every possible way. Pick whatever rock holds your attention and take it into the best light that you can. If it's water safe, especially if you've got, something like a raw chunk of flint like this, looks very different when it is submerged in water or freshly wet than it does when it is kind of dried out and that husk or cortex is apparent. If you've got something transparent or translucent, see what happens as light moves through it. Use your favorite handheld device, your phone. You're going to have a flashlight on there. You're going to have probably a good zoom on the camera so you can explore the surfaces, the interior, if it is transparent. And as you kind of ooh and ah over the stone, their spirits respond to that kind of wonder. Their intelligence kind of softens and opens and extends itself towards us. There is a kind of reciprocity that takes place just in that moment. And then, notice how you feel about it. When you take that piece of emerald to your heart, how does your whole being feel? When you are staring into the depth of that piece of polished quartz, where does your mind go? When you're wearing your amber and jet necklace, how does your body feel? Just, take inventory, because those are going to be important clues about the relationship you're building with that stone. It's seldom solely a reflection of that crystal. It's it's usually a manifestation of what happens when you come together, which means some of your baggage is coming into that too. So as we do this over time, we start to notice what is similar, what is different each time. The things that are different, it's probably a reflection of us. We're pretty mutable beings. The things that remain constant, that's usually a reflection of the stones because they're far less mutable. They're pretty solid. That is, in fact, their whole point, at least in most environments with most minerals. Salt in humid Florida is a different situation. And that's probably the best place to get started. But if you're specifically working with any of the stones that are in the book, the witching stones themselves, though I argue that every stone is a witching stone if we learn how to look for it, my best piece of advice is, of course, you have my permission, my blessing to read the chapters in any order that you want and do the practices. If you want a particular spell for healing or abundance or protection, whatever it might be, go to that. Be practical, of course. But take time to work through the book in order as well. There is a kind of initiatory journey that is woven into it. You start with flint, this really humble stone that literally has ignited change in human society and culture several times over. And we end with this kind of luminous, light-bringing gem that is emerald with its Luciferian motifs of awakening and all kinds of, we'll say, illumination. If we work them in order and do all the stuff in between, those two things are almost like octaves of one another. One sets the stage for all the things that come after, and there is a kind of magical journey enmeshed in that, the mythic journey of the witch's initiation, and there's power in there. So, of course, use the book how you want to. If you buy the book, it's your book now. I do have some ulterior motives for positioning the stones in the order that I did.
Well, you're allowed to explain your art, but I kind of love that. Pearson's version of the 12 sacred, 14 sacred stones, rather, I guess. There are 14 in here, right?
14-ish. So, we could be really pedantic. Amber and jet by modern standards, not actually stones, but are gem materials. Do we include them or do we not? They're not the same substance, but historically they were regarded as one substance. Moonstone is actually more of an attribute that is an optical effect rather than a discrete substance and occurs in a variety of species. And then crossstone is at least two species of mineral, sterolite and chiastolite. So we could say there are at least 15 unique stones represented in the book, but they're presented in 13 chapters because some of them are just, historically they could not be separated from one another.
I respect that. Totally agree, especially about the amber and jet. I also love how you entitled quartz in chapter 11 as frozen light. I just learned this year, I mean, a few weeks ago, at a retreat that I was at in my tradition, we have a lot of really, really science-minded people. We have teachers and very intelligent people who have doctorates and masters and all kinds of subjects. And one of the presenters was talking about different stones and whether it was safe, can you lick the rock? That was, I think, one of the titles that came up in this practice. And she's one of my favorite people ever. At night, we happened to pass each other, walking the campground, and she said, "Do y'all want to see some science?" And I was like, "Absolutely. Absolutely, I want to see science." I was not expecting to see what happened when she rubbed two pieces of quartzite together because it's not a spark. It truly was as if, and it is as if, there is light within the structure of the crystalline structure of this quartzite.
Yeah, so this is a property called triboluminescence. Tribo means like to scrape, to scratch, to create friction, and then luminescence, obviously, to glow. So it is an optical phenomenon that occurs when certain kinds of minerals, certain crystal lattices, undergo mechanical deformation. In other words, the rubbing, the friction, which generates little packets of photons. This is related to, but not the same thing as piezoelectricity. So when quartz is mechanically deformed, it generates a small electrical current. So one of the other effects of this is the little packets of photons, the little light energy that come out. Often with quartz-rich minerals, they're going to be a kind of greenish, green-yellow glow. Some other species might have slightly different wavelengths of photons they produce, but this phenomenon was clearly known in the ancient world. There are some scholars who argue that the kind of ritual pavements that we see, for example, around some of the megaliths, Ireland, that are just chunks of quartz embedded in the ground. Certainly not, gem quality transparent quartz, but this kind of white quartzite that you're referencing. And, this is before brick and mortar. So these are stones kind of loose packed together. And if you were to enter a kind of ecstatic trance, if you were dancing along to a drum beat, if you were stomping on the ground in dance, if you were hitting them with maybe a staff or anything else, they would be clinking together and producing flashes of light in time with your ecstatic dance, your ritual process. And that's magic.
Yeah.
It's also science, but it's still magic. And understanding the science doesn't take away any of the magic of that for me. In fact, it just enriches it that even before we could explain what is causing this, people observed it and harnessed it for their ritual and magical activities.
I was dumbfounded seeing it in person and then giddy to read about it later in your book. And I love the story that you tell about your grandfather because it's so funny how deeply meaningful some things can be, even when it's something that seems to be small at the time. So thank you once again for sharing that too. I
Yeah,
love
so many of these stones are really intimate parts of my life. Fossil urchins, most people wouldn't bat an eye at, but I used to collect them. I've got one. This one's actually English. Here's one from the Gulf Coast. But I have this little fossil urchin with its five-pointed star from the Gulf Coast of Florida, and this kind of rocky limestone beach where my great grandmother lived. And once a year or so, when we'd make the very long trek from Southeast Florida to Northwest Florida, we would get time by the ocean, and I'd collect rocks because why not? My grandfather's gift of quartz in no uncertain terms has changed my life. I remember the first time I saw magnetism demonstrated in my kindergarten class and being mystified about it. And these like really visceral reactions that I've got to the power of rock and mineral and say mineral adjacent things. This is the same wonder that humanity has felt all along. I'm not special in that regards. I'm as ordinary as they come, and I revel in that this is a fundamentally human experience. So if I can illustrate that from some of my own workings with stones, my own meetings of stones, then that's fantastic because I'm hoping it gives people permission to go have those same relationships on their own.
But your perspective is fantastic and very, very welcome. I asked you about how beginners can kind of jump into the world of working with minerals and crystals, rock. For seasoned practitioners, how does the witching stones deepen or challenge existing magical frameworks with stones? What might surprise even longtime witches?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, I think there is a kind of widespread culture of prescriptivizing our practice. We want tables of correspondences, we want lists of properties, X crystal for Y planet, and Z effect. But it's so much more nuanced than that. And the only way to kind of break the paradigm of this emerald is going to do X, Y, or Z for me is to reassess and reestablish our relationship with stones and seeking the wonder in everything about them, from their material form to their historical, cultural, sometimes linguistic values, to the folklore that is kind of in a nebulous, ever changing cloud around them, all the way up to our modern practice, breaking that reductionist view of this crystal as a means to an ends. So one of my other kind of ulterior motives in writing the Witching Stones is not just to say these 13 chapters, which cover 15-ish rocks, are the Witching Stones, but let them be examples for how you can do the same in your practice. If your favorite stone is sodalite or lapis lazuli or ruby or whatever, explore its geology in a similar way. Be really discerning about the folklore presented to you and look for the earliest evidence that we've got of it. Explore the way that modern practitioners are inspired by these things directly or indirectly, and try to kind of map out what is the story this stone is telling through all of this? What is its deeper lesson? What kind of agency does this gem offer? And those are its true virtues, as opposed to just a list of properties or a list of effects in our spellcraft. So if even if you don't resonate with any of the stones in this book, it still serves as a model for you to be able to build the same relational approach to whatever stones will enrich your magic.
Oh, absolutely. We spoke last time you were on about entrainment and the idea or the theory that as human beings align their energy to different substances, in this case, of course, stones or gemstones or crystals, there is kind of a collaborative effect. It truly feels that way to me. And while there's going to be some things that you're drawn to and others that just don't really work well with you, that doesn't mean that's going to be the same. You know, as you evolve, there are certain things that become more interesting to you. I think sedimentary stones were annoyed by me when I was younger and couldn't focus long enough or sit still long enough because I had absolutely no draw to them, and it seemed it was a reciprocal thing. So now I love them. So hopefully I've evolved a little bit. I was reading some of the reviews for this book and they're all great. The response from all of the readers so far, the early reviewers, I am not surprised by how well received it is. Were there any moments of feedback that really stuck with you?
Some of the reviews I saw, at least in kind of slightly edited form for length, as they landed on Amazon or landed on Weiser's website. But some of the others I have not seen until the book landed in my hands, which was interesting because there's a finite amount of space and a finite number of slots that you can put these things on places like Amazon. Like, I can't pick one moment, but it is really, really nice to see that people got it. Ivo Dominguez Jr. totally clocks that there is a journey in these stones and a purpose for the sequence of them. Harold Roth talks about the kind of overlooked things like lead and salt that have such important traditions. You get folks who really see that this ties into a bigger arc of human history, or it's more than about my relationship with this rock in my hand, but my relationship with the land itself. And to see that people could extract that from their interface, even with just, the uncorrected proofs was really hopeful to me. So obviously, as of right now, as we're recording, the book has not officially been released. It has begun some early distribution. Some early review copies have gone out. I got my author copies. I know of at least one store that has already gotten in stock. So hopefully, as more of that takes place, I'll be able to watch those like light bulb moments. It's my favorite thing in the world. I write because I love to teach. I love to teach because I love to learn. I appreciate my own light bulb moments. I appreciate what other folks have done for my life through them. So if this book can do that for anyone else, then I have done my job. And that's what it's really about.
Well, I think that you've done your job because it definitely, there are just aha moments and light bulb moments throughout. I am a huge nerd, and there were so many pieces of information in that book that I was surprised by. And of course, led me down a rabbit warren. And I love your references. You're always really great about citing your sources, which is, again, as a fellow nerd, really deeply appreciate that. Are there any upcoming classes, tours, online events tied to this book or your future books where people can go to dive deeper into the material?
Absolutely. I'm always doing something. So not knowing for sure when this is going to release, the best thing I can do is say, check out my website, theluminouspearl.com. You'll see all of my events and stuff right on there. I will have a handful of in-person events as well as online events that are kind of related to the topics of the book or celebrate the book release. I have my monthly online Reiki share and some other kind of ongoing activities. And I wouldn't be Nicholas if I didn't also mention that I do have another book coming in the spring. I'm super excited to see more projects kind of ripple their way out. Devin Hunter and he wrote the really gracious and lovely forward for this book. We teamed up to write a book on crystals together.
Oh, that's awesome.
So that'll be coming out not too long.
I've been watching you guys on Facebook Live whenever, I guess it was a long time ago, the last time you guys were on together. It was delightful. Yeah, Devin's forward was great as well. This is a tough question. You're probably going to roll your eyes, but I love the tough questions and the cheesy ones. If you could distill the essence of the witching stones into like a single sentence or teaching, what would that be?
How about Something along the lines, and I'm going to kind of revisit a topic I've already talked about, but stones are magic, period. It's that simple. We don't have to justify it. We don't have to do anything special to leverage it. By their very existence, they seem to defy so many odds. I mean, when you think about the very improbable set of circumstances responsible for emeralds, and yet we have emeralds. It is almost impossible for the chromium responsible for their color and the beryllium essential to their makeup appear in the same kind of rock. Almost impossible. Not entirely, but it's really unlikely. And yet we have emeralds in many parts of the earth. They're certainly not as plentiful as quartz. They're definitely not like calcite or any of the feldspars, but they still exist. And sometimes just appreciating that is enough to go, oh, wow, there is something really magical here. So if we can maybe find that in the earth, we can also hopefully find that in ourselves.
Nice. Such a good answer. Can you give us a mini tour of like the random rocks you have sitting around? Because I know you have some. I have some. Like I have random rocks. And if I do, you've already showed us flint and an emerald. I think you showed us an emerald. Did you pull up an emerald? Of
Yeah,
course you did. Of course you
not
did.
not exactly a small one here. This is an emerald from Ethiopia. This was a kind of historic find a few years back. This one's got some nice sparkly biotite from the schist in which it forms, the kind of metamorphic rock in which it forms. I've got this sweet little polished quartz. I think it maybe is from either Brazil or Madagascar. This was a gift from my dear friend Nairi over in the UK. I have some Cornish serpentine with a little tin Cornish pixie sitting atop it. This is
Oh,
from the Lizard Peninsula in Cornwall. I have Presley Bluestone, which is probably my favorite rock as opposed to mineral. Ophitic dolerite from Pembrokeshire in Wales. Famously, this was used in
mm.
the construction of Stonehenge. I've got another one of the witching stones sitting here. This is an ammonite from Whitby, but it's carved with a little snake's face on it. They used to do this because they called them serpent stones, and everyone was perplexed how these petrified serpents had no heads. So some really enterprising rock collectors started adding the heads to complete the fossils. We know they are not snakes, but that wasn't always the case. So that's just a few. I've always got more. I mean, there's a hagstone.
Yeah. Oh, that's a nice one. Mine are tiny.
I have much smaller ones. I've got like a little dish of all the witching stones off camera. This one is actually on the back cover of the book as well. So
Awesome. Oh, it's the stone. Okay, that's rad.
it's also the same emerald that's on the spine, the one I held up earlier.
Thank you. Thank you.
My pleasure.
I I recently delved, and this is just kind of a personal question, and then I promise to cut you loose. When I say recently, it's been about 5 years. I've been doing lithomancy, and I know that's something that you practice as well.
From time to time, yeah.
Yeah.
I guess I can, since it's on the internet, I can let the cat out of the bag. The topic of the book that I wrote with Devin is on crystal divination. So there
Are
are a
you
couple of
serious?
chapters.
I did it again. I did this last time. I'm so sorry. I didn't even look it up. I promise.
And yeah, it's available for pre-order. But there are a couple chapters on lithomancy in that.
Cool. That's awesome. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna snag that one. Devin is awesome, and so are you. I've really been enjoying pulling a stone every morning. I pull a stone and a rune, and I kind of enjoy the conversation with the stones. So I think that that's a really unique, kind of characteristic that they offer with divination. It's different than any other forms of divination I've used.
And it's super personal because we get to customize our set of lithomancy tools. Do you want 7 stones in there? Do you want 27 stones in there? Do you want 743? Like that seems impractical to me, but if that works for you, go for it.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I mean, you could easily take a representative of each of the witching stones, maybe several varieties of each, a flint echinoid versus a limestone echinoid, a hagstone from, maybe the Thames River of England made out of flint, and one that's sedimentary rock like coquina here in Florida. You could add different colors of moonstone, but you could certainly create your own kind of lithomancy kit out of those. I've kind of been visualizing doing something along those lines with the dish that I've got. It's a big marble dish on cast iron legs. I'd lift it up and show you, but especially when you fill it with rocks, it's heavier than I think I
Super
can
heavy, right?
do on camera. But I'm considering maybe using that as a kind of means of interfacing with the witching stones. And I do maybe not daily, but intermittent kind of um, stone divination with some inspiration from this book and the next one.
Nice. I love that. I like using casting mats or just pulling individual stones. And, some people like dowsing, some people like pendulums. And I really enjoy using the stones. And I didn't think I would. So thank you for coming on again. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
My pleasure as well. Thanks for having me, and maybe we'll do it again soon.
Yes, I would love to. Thanks, Nicholas.